Hello, my name is Ryan, and I've had a lot of requests from friends, people that I know on Facebook, on the internet, on how to make a basic tomato sauce. A lot of people know that I like to can, home canning, there's different types of home canning. I won't get into that right now in this segment. I'm hoping to do another segment, hopefully I'll tack it on to the end of this video. But for purposes of this particular little segment, I want to talk about just basic tomatoes and how to make a basic tomato sauce. There are a lot of different types of tomatoes that one can use for a sauce. A lot of people, if all you know of tomatoes is what you see in the grocery store, a lot of people think that basically just your basic red tomato that you see in the tomato store is basically the only type of tomato there is. In actuality, there are any number of tomatoes. I grow most of my tomatoes myself from seed, usually in the spring. It's kind of mid-August right now when I'm filming this, and so I have a lot of different tomatoes that are coming ripe. But it's surprising for a lot of people to learn, if all you know is the red tomato, that there are many different types of tomatoes. They come in all different sizes. Some are big, some are small. But they also come in different colors. You can have your yellow tomatoes. You could have, there's the German varieties of tomatoes like that are yellow. Some of them there's actually a variety of tomato that actually is orange. It's almost like the color of like a traffic cone. It's called a Nebraska wedding tomato. I didn't grow any of those this year. I've grown them in the past, but I've found the Nebraska wedding tomatoes to be rather finicky. This, I don't know if you can see it on the screen here, but this is actually called a type of tomato called a Cherokee purple tomato. If you cut into it, it's actually a very, very dark red, actually purple. I grow those. Tomatoes also come in, I don't know if you can see this, striped varieties. So some are big, some are small. Let's see, you also have some kind of speckledy type tomatoes. I don't know if you can see that. But there's varieties of those. Some are called Amish paste style tomatoes that are kind of shaped like this. Some are like the little bitty cherry tomatoes like you see on little garden salads that you get at the restaurants. But I don't particularly recommend those for canning because once you take the skin off and the peel and gut them, there's nothing left of those silly little ones. But like I said, they come in all sizes. There's big ones, there's small ones. There's even like purple style tomatoes, and so there's two schools of thought on what kind of tomatoes to put into a sauce. Some people like just having one particular type of tomato and using only that type of tomato for the sauce. I'm actually not that picky. I'm kind of in the other school of thought. I actually like having a wide variety of tomatoes kind of blended together to make a sauce. Each tomato kind of has its own a little bit of a different texture, a little bit of a different taste. Some are more acidic, some are sweeter, some are good for just cutting up, slicing, and eating just plain. I'll be honest, I don't like eating raw tomatoes. I only like cooked tomatoes. I think I got burnt out on them when I was a child because my mother was always canning tomatoes all summer, and I think it made me sick of raw tomatoes. But I like cutting them all up and blending them up and making a sauce. Each sauce is a little bit different depending on what type of blends of tomatoes you use. If you do get to try different types of tomatoes, I would recommend kind of just getting to know which ones you like the flavor. When you get more into baking sauces, you can certainly pick and choose which ones you like because each adds its own little kick, its own little flavor. I only use generally tomatoes that I grow myself, known as heirloom tomatoes or non-GMO tomatoes. I don't like a lot of the hybridized or genetically modified tomatoes. I think they tend to become very bland. But whatever type of tomato you can get, if all you can get is going to the grocery store and getting the big red tomato, get a bunch of those and make a sauce. That's fine. That's a good place to start. If you are lucky to grow your own tomatoes, or if you have access to a farmer's market where you can get more, different types of tomatoes, that's fine. One thing I would add, if you are interested in growing your own tomatoes or learning about different types of tomatoes that maybe you have never heard about, other than if all you know is red tomatoes, there's a good book that is put out called Epic Tomatoes. I'll include it in the credits at the end of this video, that talks about a lot of the different types of heirloom and non-GMO tomatoes, that from like Cherokee Purples to Sudeth Brandywines. This is also a very good reference if you want to learn how to can or preserve seeds, or basically anything you would want to know about any sort of more organic tomatoes. I'd recommend this. It's called Epic Tomatoes. It's written by a man named Craig Lehoulier, Lehoullier. Again, I'll put this on the kind of at the end, so if you want that reference. But there are a lot of different places you can get seeds if you want to grow your own tomatoes from seed in the spring. I'll also include some of those links at the end. But again, this is just a sort of a basic understanding of there's all different types of tomatoes that you can use. And really, any type of tomato can be used, even if it's got like a little brown spot or something like that. That they aren't prime tomatoes. But that's fine. You can, when we go through the process of skinning the tomato, which will be the next segment, and I'm going to do, you can just cut off the bad part and use the perfectly good part of the tomato as well. But we'll get into that in the next segment. So I hope you join me for part 2 of tomatoes. But again, my name is Ryan, and I hope that after watching this video, you can learn more about tomatoes and how to make your own basic tomato sauce. Well, welcome back to our second part of our little video here on how to make a basic tomato sauce. Tomato sauce is very easy to make. A lot of people think it's very hard and very complicated, but it will be messy, and there's a certain finesse and art to it, but it's actually pretty easy. And so let's see what you need to make tomato sauce. Well, obviously you need tomatoes. Imagine that. I have here, if you can look, I have several. I have a whole thing of tomatoes that I picked. Also have a big thing of tomatoes here, and so that's one of the things that you need. Tomatoes. Usually, depending on the amount of sauce you want to make, will depend on how much tomatoes you want to use. Usually, a good rule of thumb, if you look at the recipe magazines and other places, usually you probably want to use about 10 pounds of tomatoes or more. The thing you have to remember is that basically once you get the basic sauce in the pot ready, you are generally going to cook it down by about half. You're going to cook out about half the liquid once we get it in the pot, and you'll see what I'm talking about in a moment. So you want to keep that in mind. So there we go. So we got tomatoes. I'm going to make a big batch of tomato sauce, and we'll probably I'll can part of it. It will be a large pot. But what you need to do sauce, and this is the easiest way that I've found, is that I generally want to start with like 2 big pots. I've got a pot of water here that's, in fact, I need to turn it on so it'll start boiling. And another pot to keep the processed tomatoes in, and we'll get to that in a minute. I also like to add to my tomato sauce some basic bell peppers. Again, these are homegrown bell peppers. I like a little spicy in my sauce, so I like some jalapenos. And if you can find a nice clove of garlic, you can get those in most stores, or if you can find some fresh. This is actually a Russian type of garlic that I found at a local farmer's market. It's quite delicious. You'll need a good cutting board. And ideally, particularly if you're cutting up big tomatoes, you'll need a big knife just to cut it up. It's easier in handling. If all you have is basically a paring knife, that works too. And you'll need a big sink. I usually use a big sink, and I will fill it up with cold water, and you'll see why in a moment. But basically, the process here is once the pot gets up to a good boil, you're going to stick some of the tomatoes in here and let them cook for about 45 seconds, at which point you will transfer them. I guess you also need a slotted spoon or some way, or a net or something, to transfer the tomatoes to the cold water. You probably even add a few ice cubes to that, so that when you plunk it in after it's been in the boiling water for about 45 seconds or so, 50 seconds, it'll cool them down enough so you can handle them. and that will allow you to be able to pull off the skin and also to cut out the seeds, and a process that we'll show you here in a minute. And we're gonna, once we do that, we'll put it into a pot or a bowl of some kind, something like that. We'll also cut up the peppers, add the peppers to it, and the garlic. And then this is the point that I usually do that makes it the easiest. I like, after everything has been processed, to get out your blender, if you have a good strong blender or a food processor, and kind of process it up into a fine kind of a pre-cooked sauce, so it makes everything uniform. You don't have lumps and big blobs of tomatoes and little bits of pepper floating around. Make it a uniform sauce, and then you'll start cooking it down. So that's basically the process. Okay, so we'll come back in just a second, and we'll begin the actual peeling of the tomato. Okay, so what we're going to talk about here, let me see if I can get a good tomato here to demonstrate. The first thing we have to worry about when we're making a sauce is we have to get it off the skin. Tomatoes have this little skin it's very hard. I don't know if you can see what I'm doing here, but there's a little skin that comes off the tomato just like that. And it's very hard to get off just by yourself, by peeling it without completely squishing the tomato. You can't just like peel it like with a potato peeler. It doesn't work very well. So there is a method of getting off this little membrane skin. You do want to get all of your membrane skins off, because I mean, they're edible, you can eat them, but they kind of get stuck in your teeth, and they're just unpleasant in a sauce, because they don't really cook down. They sort of float around, and you have these little weird little skins floating in the sauce. So you want to get rid of all the skin. Okay, so the easiest way to do that is actually to take your tomatoes, and in the previous section I was telling you about the boiling pot of water. Get it up to a good nice little boil, and you're going to take the tomatoes. I usually plop them in. I'll grab some tomatoes here. I usually plop them in about 5 at a time or so. Get them into you're basically just scalding them. You're going to scald for about, if you got like a timer or something, I usually time it for about 45 seconds or so. And let's see, put the timer on here, and just sort of let those scald for about 45 seconds or thereabouts. Then what you will do is you will, after it's done, I'm kind of steaming up the lens here on my camera, but what you are doing is, after the 45 seconds or so, 50 seconds, depending on how ripe the tomatoes are. The riper the tomatoes, the easier the skin will come off. But after that, you take if you have a good slotted spoon of some kind. This is like a little pasta spoon that I think I got years ago at a grocery store for like $1. Or if you've got like a little net or something, just something to scoop out the tomatoes. And there goes the timer there. So you're just going to scoop them out like that, and then you'll take them over into the water and just let them sit in the cold water for a few minutes, or for a few seconds. And let's see, there's another one there, and just kind of scoop them all out. There we go. There's, whoopsies. Oh, let's see what I talked about making a mess. Well, I just dropped one on the floor. That's a big mess. So anyway, feel like it's an outtake of old Julia Child, oh potato, oh tomato. But like I said, you probably generally want, once you start doing this process, to put on your apron, because you will make a mess, just as I just demonstrated haphazardly. So I'm going to put on my apron now, and I'm going to reposition my camera, and I'll show you what I'm talking about when I'm talking about peeling off the skin and cutting out the tomatoes. Okay, well, this is, I've rigged up this, my jolly good tripod here in what I'm going to call my Mater Cam. And we're going to talk about how to do the peeling of the tomato. So I hope you can see this. Maybe I need to turn on a little backlighting here. Maybe that'll help. But these are the tomatoes that I just took off the scalding water. And so what you do, after you've scalded them, see how easily that peels right off? You see that skin? you're going to peel off that skin. Okay, just like that. It slides right off. After you scald them, it just slides right off. And at this point, you want to dispose of the skins. Okay, so usually this sink here is a disposal. So I just throw the skins and the seed just into the cold water where we had the tomatoes, and go from there. So now the second part of that, after you get the skin off, and it just comes right off. It's just lovely. You generally want to core the little green stem part. You want to core that with your little paring knife, okay? And just core that off. Again, you'll want to completely dispose of that. There's no reason for it. And you'll notice, you see all the seeds that are coming out here. There's the seeds that are just sort of blobbing out just like that. You want to get rid of all of these seeds. Now, if you want to save the seeds, you can save some of these seeds, and in another video I will try to show you how to save the seed if you want to sprout them for your own tomato plants next year. But anyway, what you're going to do here is you're going to cut the tomato, and you really want to get all of the goop and because it's kind of a watery, seedy blob out. You want to get all of that out, just drain it out into the water, so that all you have is basically the meat of the fruit. A tomato is a fruit, by the way, it's not a vegetable. So they tell me, I have no idea why. And, you see you've gotten all the seeds out. And just put them in the bowl or the pot that you that you're going to collect all of the meat from the tomato in. Okay. Now again, we're getting rid of kind of draining the tomato seeds out. And now all the extra juice until basically you're just left with that meat. Kind of throw all that into a pot, and when we get all of the tomatoes skinned, then we'll worry about the next part of blending it up and actually beginning the process of making the actual sauce. Okay, I was talking earlier about the different types of tomatoes, not just the regular red ones, but the process of skinning the tomato is basically the same for any type of tomato. This is a more kind of Amish paste style tomato that has been scalded and is already in the cool water. For a little one like that, you basically, you still have to cut off the end a little bit. You don't want that green tip in there. But basically, you're opening it up just like normal. You see the kind of the goopy seed in there. You want to get rid of all that goopy seed, and just leave the meat of the little pieces of tomato. It's also the same for just a yellow tomato. If you can see that, the skin peels right off. Exact same process, nothing hard about it. This one's a little bit bigger. In fact, one of the bigger tomatoes I have in this batch. So I'm getting off all the skin here. Even though it's a yellow tomato, and yellow tomatoes are in fact ripe. They're fully ripe. They don't turn red or any other color. So when you're growing them, it's sometimes a little bit of a challenge to test when they're ripe, because usually the red tomato is green and then it turns red when it's ripe. So with the yellow ones, it's sort of like, well, is it ripe or not? But you just sort of have to you get used to it. This, you can see the yellow goop here. It's the seed and the goop is the same. It's just a slightly different color. The yellow tomatoes have a very interesting texture. They're a little bit different of a texture of a fruit than the basic red tomato, but they have a very good flavor. This is a German style. It's almost sweet. It's really good. If you've ever seen yellow tomatoes at your local farmer's market, I recommend trying some. They're really quite delicious. Particularly if you just want to eat them straight and not put them into a sauce. They're really good to just eat for like a BLT or what have you. So again, it doesn't matter what type of tomato it is. Once you scald them and put them in the cold water, the skin just slides right off. You do have to remember to cut it up and cut out the where the stem was. I just get rid of all the goopy stuff into the draining water. And as soon as I get done here, let me put that in. I've done a few of the tomatoes in between clips here, so I'm going to show you what I'm doing. If you can look into that pot there, I'm probably going to fill up most of that pot with the tomatoes. But again, you probably can see, if you look closely, I haven't gotten every single one of those seeds out. Some people are really fanatical about getting the various types of seed out. They'll strain it, run it through a strainer, like a cloth or something. I don't worry so much about just a little bit of a seed. I think a little seed is fine. You can scoop it out as it's cooking. But in any event, just try to get out as many seeds as you can, and that's in the skin. The skin is really I'm more concerned about than the seed. If you're looking for something to do in between when your tomatoes are scalding and them in the water, I kind of periodically will take some of the peppers, and let's see, make sure I'm this is a purple bell pepper, and I like to put up some peppers into the sauce as well. You can also cut up an onion if that's your thing. I forgot to get any onions, so there will be no onions in this sauce. But I generally just like to cut off, get off the seeds of the bell pepper. Just cut them up into little, I cut them up into little strips, and just throw them in with the tomato sauce. We're going to blend all this sauce up with the blender here when we get everything done. But when you're waiting in between the tomatoes being scalded and going into the cold water, grab one of your peppers and just put those in the pot too. And you can also do the same thing with cloves of garlic. You want to get rid of all the skin stuff around the garlic clove. But once you do that, there's another piece of pepper. Get rid of that husky shell, and you just want to get down to the actual clove of the garlic. And I usually use about a whole head of clove of garlic. This is where the knife comes in handy, because sometimes it's hard to get the outer skin of the garlic out. So you just take the knife and kind of pop it like that, and then the husk will come right off. Be careful using the knife, of course. Don't again be like Julia Child and cut your hand off. But just sort of cut up into kind of coarse chunks of the garlic. Throw them in with the tomato sauce. And then kind of do that with all the garlic, all the peppers you want to add, onions if you want to add onion, and then we'll blend it all up. But again, just cutting it all up, putting it into the... I have finished pretty much most of the tomatoes. There's a few little ones in there that aren't ripe yet, but I have processed them all, and I'm going to show you... I apologize for the camera angle. I realize this is sort of a Blair tomato project going on here. But I have processed all of the tomatoes. Pretty much, I'm showing you the good, the bad, and the ugly here. All the seeds and stuff have gone into the sink here. Processed all of them, cut out all the seeds, cut out all got the slime out, the skins, that's all right there. It's going to go down the disposal. And then we pretty much have, from the tomatoes that I showed you at the beginning, minus a few extras that I haven't been able to use, pretty much a full pot of tomatoes. Tomatoes, and these are some of the peppers that I also cut up, putting in there. And so I'm going to get all this cleaned up, and then we're going to do the part where I put it all in the blender, and then we'll put it into the pot and actually start cooking the sauce. So stay tuned. Okay, well, we're back, and I've already started. I did the first batch of this and forgot to turn the camera on, so we'll have to make do with the second run through. But what we're going to do now is the pot that we have all the tomatoes and stuff that we've processed, we're going to put into the blender. And we're going to blend all this up, including the peppers, and if you put any onions in, or garlic, any other herbs or spices. We're just doing a straight sauce, so I'm not going to gum it up with too many spices and things. But just put it in the blender, blend it up just like that. On the trusty blender. And basically, once it gets blended, you get basically the beginnings of the sauce. And watch out here, just pour that in. And you can see that that's been well blended up, and you basically have the beginnings of a tomato sauce in there. What we're going to do is we're going to blend up all of that, put it into the other bowl, and then we're going to take it over to the oven and basically start cooking it down. But the blending trick, I think, works nicely. It gives it a good, you don't have glumpy things of tomatoes in there. It also blends up the peppers and whatnot. So you get a nice pot of processed, basically tomato juice, tomato stuff. So we'll get back just a minute when we get all this done, and we'll do the final boil section of this. Taken the blender and I've blended up pretty much all that was left in the tomato sauce. This is what was left of the pan. If there's a little juice and seeds and junk on the bottom of the pan, don't worry about getting every single little bit of juice, because basically you're just going to cook it off anyhow. So this is the final kind of pot of sauce. I already have it on the eye. I'm letting it warm up and come to a boil. It's already been cooking for a couple of minutes now since I've turned on the camera. If you can look, you can see some bubbles starting to form on the basis on the base of the sauce there. And so what we're going to do now, as this begins cooking down, a couple of things to keep in mind. First of all, where you get started, remember the line in the pot where the sauce is. After you've blended all this up and you're starting to do the final cook for the sauce, you're going to need to basically cook it down by half or thereabouts, depending on how thick you want the sauce, usually about half. So if it's like, right here on the pot, you're probably going to cook it down to, good halfway down. The longer you cook it, the thicker it will get. You're basically cooking off the excess liquid that's in that was in the tomatoes. And as it starts to cook, this is the other thing to keep in mind. If you want good sauce, you will start noticing as the tomatoes begin to cook down, they begin to basically what's known as pectin in the tomato fruit. You can see that it's called, I call it scum. I don't know what it is. But as it starts to cook down, you'll want to get out your, if I can find it, what did I do with it? Your slotted spoon or just a regular spoon. And you're going to want to skim off that scum as it starts cooking down. It won't hurt you. It doesn't necessarily taste bad per se, but it gives it that scum, that pectin-y, bubbly junk, will really, particularly if you're going to can it later, you'll just put it in a bowl or something and dispose of it down the disposal. It will stay that foamy texture, even if you can it, put it in a jar or whatever. So as it's cooking, you just want to skim that stuff off, largely for about the first probably 15 or 20 minutes of the cook. And as it continues to cook, the kind of the foamy scum will eventually just sort of go away, and you'll skim it all off, and you'll just have a pure sauce. But you really do want to kind of skim that junk off, because it gives it a weird texture, the scummy stuff on the top. So I think my battery is about to die here on my camera, so I'm going to let this cook down a little bit. Maybe do a little bit more when it starts cooking down a bit, and show you some of the scum. And then as it's beginning to cook down, I'll also try to show you the final product as it begins to cook. You'll probably want to cook it for quite a while. This is a time-consuming process. You'll probably want to cook it for probably at a good boil. Once it comes up to a boil, I'll turn it down to a kind of medium simmer, and just sort of let it cook down very slowly. It's not a race. It may take an hour, depending on how much you have. It may take more than that, until it basically cooks down by about half. Okay, so that's what you'll want to do. Also, as it begins to boil, you'll probably want to put the lid on the pot, sort of kind of a jar like that, to let the steam escape. But once the tomatoes really start boiling and popping, you'll have tomato slopping all over your stove. So you want to keep in mind in that. So you want to keep an eye on it again as it begins to boil. It's kind of skim off that scummy, bubbly stuff. You'll probably maybe get a bowl full or so of that, depending if you have a whole pot. And so that's basically at this point we just keep skimming off the scum and let it cook down by half for an hour or more, depending on how thick you want it. And that's basically how you make tomato sauce. It's really not hard. It is time consuming, and as you can see, it's a big mess. But it's a lot of fun, and there's nothing quite like a good tomato sauce. Cooking down the sauce here. Again, you see what I'm saying about that kind of foamy scum. You got to kind of skim off. It's been cooking now for probably 5 or 10 minutes since my last little clip. But as this, you probably want to stir it periodically, make sure there's any particularly as it begins to thicken. you will want to stir it, because otherwise the thick stuff on the bottom, the thicker part of the sauce, it might scorch if you're not careful. But also when you're blending it up and cutting up stuff at the beginning, if you're wanting to make an Italian sauce, I just pretty much used straight up peppers and tomatoes. You can also add herbs of a variety of kinds, pretty much to taste. You might be able to you put in some, if you have some fresh oregano, put in a good bit of oregano or sweet basil. Basil sauce is also quite good. You can add thyme. You can add any number of herbs, whatever to taste that you like. Usually, traditionally, it's either basil or oregano. If you want to add that. But I was just doing a very basic sauce. If you don't particularly want oregano, if you have heart problem, or not heart problems, but if you have tend to have like an ulcer or stomach issues, probably want to lay off the oregano. That is an irritant to the stomach if you have stomach issues. But just the basic sauce again. As it begins to cook down, you see it's already cooked down a little bit. You continue to skim off that kind of scummy stuff, and you'll know it when you see it. But and also, if you're going to can it, you might also consider. Well, here I'm going to show you. This is the basic Italian tomato sauce recipe that's in the Ball canning book. As you can see, onions, pretty much everything we put in it except the herbs. I didn't actually bother to put herbs in this, mainly because I'm going to actually turn this tomato sauce when it's done cooking into an enchilada sauce, which is a little bit different. It doesn't have oregano and stuff in it. But in any event, hope you have enjoyed this. I'll try to do one more clip at the end as this is cooking down. But again, happy cooking, and again, really with tomato sauce, really all you need is tomatoes. You can add some peppers and stuff for texture and herbs, but basically if you got tomatoes, you can skin them, blend them up, get the seeds out and all that stuff, and let it cook down by half. And that's really all there is. After the scum has been skimmed off, we'll cook down probably about a quarter. We'll probably cook this down another quarter before it's done here. This is the, it's cooked down not quite halfway, but a good third plus. As you can see, the tomato sauce is getting a lot thicker. At this point, the sauce is cooked. You cook it down to as thick as you want it. The longer you cook it, thicker it'll get, till eventually it turns into a paste if you cook it down another third or so. At this point, I kind of like it a little more on the runny side. So that's how you do tomato sauce. Thanks for